we arrived at chapter 5, supply and demand. It's the final chapter. So we will be looking at the supply and demand from the process of coordination of activities and decisions of the suppliers and demanders in their marketplace. So what the main point of the chapter, we will explain step by step the effect of changes in the demand and supply, and demonstrate how price changes coordinate economic activity. This will be the focus of the discussion. And then we will show effects of the price ceiling and price floors on the behavior of consumers and producers. We will see what will be consequences when the government establishes fixed prices on some products. And then we will see in the process how change in the prices will eliminate the so-called surpluses and shortages in the economy. After disintegration of the former Soviet Union, which happened in the 1990s, news reported regularly about unharvested food rotting in rural areas across the whole practical Soviet Union, while the grocery store shelves stood empty in the cities. It was a weird situation. But that was the fact that was reported by the news. So people wanted food, right? Of course. And there was the fields and the trucks and the people who could produce those foods. But for some reason, that didn't happen. So when the people want something done, in this case, they want to see the food on the shelves of their stores and are willing to pay what others want for doing it. Say they're willing to pay for the food, but it doesn't happen. This is the evidence of the failure of cooperation. Why does it occur? That's the main question. Due to economic way of thinking, this failure occurs because the cost of arranging transactions are too high. So what we mean by transaction? Transactions are the agreements or contracts between demanders, buyers, and suppliers. And they are costly procedures. So transaction costs are the cost of these arrangements. And in our situation in the former Soviet Union, it was not enough that people were willing to pay what farmers would require for their food. Someone must arrange the actual transaction. Someone must step in and arrange that transaction between the people, consumers, and producers. Now we're asking the question, could a situation like this happen in Canada or say in the United States or in any of the developed countries? And the answer is not likely. First of all, because we didn't see that, right, happen. I've been living in Canada for 20 years and I never saw that. But I've seen that situation in Ukraine. Why that situation couldn't happen in Canada? Because the resources to produce food, fields, farm machinery, trucks, warehouses, and retail stores are privately owned. And therefore, when we have a system of clearly defined property rights, people with information about the situation, which situation that consumers want food, and there are resources available to produce that food, they have very strong incentives to acquire control of whatever resources are needed to move the food from where it does not have use, say from the fields, to where it does. So from the fields to the shelves of the stores. The thing is that we take for granted the system of the clearly defined property rights. We just don't notice that because we're used to it. But that system, if you go back to the history, that system, it took for Europe probably 200 or 300 years to develop that system of property rights. And that system produced a vast network of institutions, say stock exchange, good exchange, in which people engage with any frequency or regularity. Say the judicial system that protects the rights of producers and consumers. And that network, vast network of institutions, make that transaction cost sufficiently low. In order, say, for a farmer to move the food from his field to the store, he doesn't have to directly and to be involved with the negotiation with the owner of the stores. He is just facing the standardized system of the say the rights that allows him to solve this problem. Ukraine, we go back to Ukraine, part of the Soviet Union, who is currently attempting to move to the market system, facing a huge obstacle of high transaction costs. And the reason is the lack of the institutions that are crucial to the effective working of the market system. So we can ask why the Ukraine doesn't have those institutions. Could they be exported from the developed countries? I remember in the 90s, when the Ukraine became independent, there was an article in one of the famous German magazines, and the author predicted that Ukraine, it will take Ukraine 10 years to develop the effective market system. I believe probably that author didn't realize that it took Germany 300 years to develop these institutions that form the market systems. So the Ukraine only now wants it. Even Ukraine didn't start the process of privatization. So Ukraine doesn't have the system of clearly defined property rights. First of all, the land is not privately owned, and the vast, say, portion of the economy owned by the government. And only now the government of Ukraine is attempting to sell the enterprises in the crucial sectors of the economy to private persons. So without private property, we cannot build the institutions that will reduce the transaction cost. So for Ukraine, the crucial question is, can this country create quickly, relatively quickly, the complex of institutions that have elsewhere come into existence through a slow evolutionary process to overcome the problem of high transaction costs? What could be the answer to that question? Yeah, we could guess, but probably it will take at least 40, 50 years because these institutions cannot be developed overnight. And the success of the economic reform in Ukraine, unfortunately, largely depends on the answer to this question. So, yeah, we have to wait. Probably my generation, people of my age that who live in Ukraine right now, yeah, they want to see the change in their standard of living, but I believe it will not happen, say, in 5 or 10 years, right? Because if you look deeply, it depends on the existence of these institutions. And due to the historical evidence, we know that development of this institution took at least 200 years in Europe. So now we will be looking at the coordinating role of money prices in the economy. Coordination refers to the people, buyers and suppliers that engage in exchange goods in the marketplace. So nowadays, you people engage in a barter. You probably don't see much of the barter transactions. Engage in what they produce directly, what they want. Instead, we see that people engage in exchange through the medium of money, because using money lowers transaction costs. So what would be the, say, example that money lowers transaction cost? Assume you live in a, say, small society and you are producing violence. You are a maker of violence. So you made a violin and you want to say milk, right? Because you like milk. So you're looking for a farmer who produces milk and bring a violin to him. And that a farmer has a daughter who would like to play violin. And you talk to the farmer and he says, yeah, I need milk, but you've been producing that violin. It took you probably 2 weeks to do that. So farmer says, yeah, in exchange for your violin, I will give you, say, 100 liters of milk. That's the value of the violin. But you say, I don't need 100 liters of milk because I can't store it. It will spoil it. I just need probably 1 liter of milk. So you see that I don't say that in order for you to find a farmer who has a daughter who want to play violin, it's not an easy task. It will take you will lose, it will take lots of time to find that person. So, and it's costly for you. So you see, in that barter world, to sell your stuff, it is not easy. You want to find a person who really need that produce, and that produce, on the other hand, is, say, helpful for you. So that transaction wouldn't happen. And that's why barter system is not effective, because of the huge transaction costs. But money has another advantage in addition to the fact that everybody is willing to accept it in exchange. The amount of it often in exchange can be adjusted up or down by very small as well as large amounts. Again, if we're going back to that example that I make in violins, when I sell the violins to the farmer for money, I will buy for the money just 1 liter milk. I will not be using all the money I get for the violin to buy the whole bulk, right, of the milk, 100 liters. I could buy only 1 liter of milk. That will create a great advantage, facilitating transactions in the marketplace. If you look at the history of evolution of money, you will see that different goods were playing a role of money and different stages of the history. So again, it didn't happen overnight that people moved from the barter to the money system. It took probably at least in different countries, like we have different history, but at least 500–600 years to develop the system of exchange based on the money. So now, having realized that ability to make small adjustments to money prices is essential to the coordination of commercial society because it greatly facilitates the exchange process, we will be looking at the mechanics of that process of coordination between consumers and producers, between buyers and sellers. So all important factors that affect the exchange can be divided into two categories. First of all, factors associated with the demand or affecting demand, and factors affecting supply. When you do demand-supply analysis, it's very important to keep that in mind. So now, assume we have event that we have information that a wheat crop fails in Russia and Ukraine due to severe drought. So, and what will happen to the price and quantity of wheat exchange in Canada if that happened? So now we will be looking at the, first of all, at the demand side and asking question if there are any factors that affect the demand for wheat. And we see, oh yes, okay, because Canadian wheat can be viewed as a substitute for wheat grown elsewhere. Although there'll be slight differences between the wheat produced, say, in Russia or Ukraine and Canada, but practically wheat is a standard product. So if this is the case, then we expect that the demand for Canadian wheat will significantly increase. And as you know from the previous chapter, we will see the shift of the demand curve to the right, which reflect the increase in demand. So now we're asking another question. Due to that shift, which will increase more, the price or the quantity of wheat offered for sale? And in order for us to answer this question, we should be looking at the elasticity, supply of the wheat, and asking question, is the supply of Canadian wheat elastic or inelastic? First of all, as we discussed in the last chapter, the price elasticity of supply depends primarily of the time period we are considering. So initially, when the farmers in Canada get more calls from the demanders of wheat in Russia, that increase in demand for wheat will bid up the current price. And farmers who are holding wheat for future sales in their inventories will choose to sell at least some portion of it. So it means that the farmers of Canada will be able immediately respond to that increase in the price for wheat. And that situation will be reflected in that diagram where the supply for the wheat is relatively steep, which is inelastic. And due to increase of the demand, Canadian farmers will satisfy their demand, emptying out portion of their inventories. But that's not the whole story. Due to that increase in demand and inelastic supply, you will see that there'll be a significant increase in the price for the wheat. So higher price for the wheat will encourage farmers to plant more wheat in the future, say, for the next years. So, and the farmers will respond to the expectation of higher prices by increases the amount of wheat planted, say, for the near future. And in a couple of years, they will be able to satisfy increased demand for wheat more significantly. So that's why in the long run, supply of wheat will be described by the relatively flat curve. So the answer for this question which will increase more, price or the quantity of the wheat offered for sale? As I say, yeah, it depends on the time period. In the short run, we will see that the price of the wheat will increase more than the quantity of the wheat. But in the long run, we will expect that the quantity of the wheat will increase more than the price. So now we are asking another question. So we've done with the analysis of the market for wheat. Now we're asking questions, how will all these actions on the market for wheat will affect price of the soybeans? Again, we are looking at the two sides of the market for soybeans, demand side and supply side. And first of all, we say at the question if there is any factor that affect the demand for soybeans. And we realize that the soybeans are substitute for wheat. So if this is the case, then when the price of wheat rises, then rational consumers, people, will naturally switch from the wheat to soybeans. So there'll be a little bit shift in the demand curve. But in this case, the process of the substitution will not have a significant impact on the demand for soybeans. So we could probably just ignore that demand effect. But there is another side of the market, supply side. And if we realize that there is another type of substitution in production. When farmers realize that the price for wheat will be increasing in the market, they will devote additional land to wheat production, withdrawing the land, say, from the production of the say soybeans or just another say from buckwheat, right? So the increase in the expected price for wheat will raise the opportunity cost of growing soybeans. And as a result, the supply curve for the soybeans will shift up leftward. So, so that's the picture of the market for the soybean, where we just did pay attention to the shift in the demand because it was insignificant, but there was more significant shift in the supply curve. So that's the answer to our question, right? That the price of the soybean will increase and the quantity of the soybeans exchanged in the market will be declined. So now as we have gone through the example of the how change in the market prices for wheat affect the behavior of consumers and producers, we will look at the situation when government interferes in that process of coordination activities between the buyers and sellers, and what will be the consequences of this. Because this is a common practice that governments establishes the fixed prices. So first of all, we want to realize that to a demander, the price of a good is a part of the cost of acquiring it. So when you buy a thing on the market, it's a cost to you. But at the same time, to a supplier that sells out the stuff to you, that price represents income. So the same transaction is reflected in the cost for a buyer and the income for the seller. So that's why so many people don't appreciate the coordinating role prices play, and that's why often the governments try to prevent the price changes from occurring. So the consequences of government intervention will typically be quite different from what was intended. And we will see that. Because the price fixing, due to the economic way of thinking, amounts to suspending the working procedure for securing social coordination. It will eliminate the crucial element in the basic process of the interactions between the consumers and producers. So let's look at the example of what has happened in the middle of 70s on the market for gasoline. It's the example of the famous oil crisis when the OPEC countries decided to cut the supply of crude oil. So we see that the demand curve for gasoline is very inelastic. It means that the large percentage increase in the price will lead to the much smaller percentage decrease in the quantity demanded. Why? Because the substitutes for gasoline for many of us are not very attractive. Say, if I ask myself, would I be very sensitive to the increase of price for gasoline, I would say probably not, because I need, in order for me to move from point A to point B, say to get to my work, I need to fill out my tank. But it does mean that there are no substitute for the gasoline at all. If the price for gasoline will be, say, maintained for a relatively long period of time, people will be joining a carpool. They will be probably taking a bus or buying a smaller car or staying at home. Yeah, that's one of the options, but it will happen in the long run. So that's why the demand curve for gasoline is relatively steep or very inelastic. So now let's look at the supply curve for gasoline. On that figure, supply curve for gasoline is also inelastic. And the reason for that very high inelasticity is the time. Because although time plays an important role in the responses of users or consumers to price changes, but it plays a relatively larger role in the responses of producers. Can you imagine? You probably realize that producers of, say, the owners of refineries cannot respond overnight to the, say, price increase in the gasoline, right? And they can't get enough oil overnight to produce that gasoline. So it takes time. So that's why the supply curve for the gasoline will be relatively steep. Now we're asking questions. So there was a fact that great shortages of the gasoline, say on people who's, I never been in the United States and Canada at that time, but people say that there were chaos on the gas stations in the middle of 70s and by the end of the 70s. And we're asking questions. What was the reason for these shortages? And is it the boiled down to the inadequate supply of crude oil? So that's our main question. And if we look carefully to the question, we would realize that more than enough oil could have been supplied in the 1979. You remember that in 1979 there was turmoil, political turmoil in Iran. There was a change in political system in Iran, and that's why there was a huge cutback of oil, of Iran's oil to the world market. But even in this situation, we could see that more than enough oil could have been supplied to keep refineries running at the 100th capacity if the refineries, there was the condition, and ultimately consumers of refined products, say gasoline, had been willing and able to pay the price. What was the reason for the keeping the inadequate supplies of crude oil on the market? To keep the oil prices relatively high. But if the consumers were willing to pay the high prices for the gasoline, more oil will be supplied to the refineries. But as a matter of fact, consumers were willing, but they were not able to pay the higher price. Why? Because Canadian government introduced the National Energy Program that fixed the price for the gasoline. Now we're asking the question. You see on the market, on the diagram, the market clearing price is about 50 cents per liter. That price would satisfy consumers and producers. At that price, amount of gasoline demanded by consumers will be equal to the amount of gasoline supplied by the producers. So at that price, there would be no shortages of the gasoline. But why the government didn't allow the price for the gasoline move to that market clearing level? It was established much lower. I believe it was about 20 cents per liter. And the reason was due to the statements made at the time, the price control were designed to prevent oil companies from obtaining a large profit at the expense of low-income consumers. And that was the justification for the government to fix prices for the gasoline. But the proponents of the price control didn't point out, and probably they didn't realize, that freezing prices, they were disconnecting a crucial link in the society system of mutual adjustment and cooperation. And it's not only a theoretical statement. Many people witnessed, right, who's been living at the time, the chaos on the gas stations, all these lineups and searching for the gasoline, that the instead of the smooth cooperation between consumers and producers, we saw the chaos on the market for gasoline. So now we're asking question, why don't advocates of price controls recognize the consequences of what they are calling for? So the majority of those people, say politicians, who support price controls are quite likely sincere in their belief that freezing prices by law will protect vulnerable people while doing a little harm to others. They hold the so-called popular perspective on supply and demand. So what's in their belief, what's in their mind when they make these decisions to fix prices? So according to the popular perspective, those who supply particular goods, producers, will not supply any good at all below their cost of production, which is set at the constant that is fixed by the fact of nature or by technology. So if they assume this is the level of the costs of production, when the price is below their cost, you see there is no supply. And when the price rises above the minimum level, they will be willing to supply as much or as little as consumers are willing to purchase, up to the limit of their capacity. So you see, assume this is the current price, that it's above the cost level, and at that price, they are willing to supply as much as consumers demand. So what the consumer demand? Due to the popular perspective, consumers are willing to purchase how much they need. So this is the how much they need. So it's a constant based on the needs of consumers, regardless of the price. So they believe that doesn't matter what is the price of the product, consumers are willing to buy the same amount of goods. And when the price, say, reaches some upper level, they will not be willing to buy any good. So that's the what they have in mind to establish the price control. So assume the government share this view on the demand and supply, and when they want to establish the fixed price or decrease the price from the high prices suggested by the forces of the markets, they would say, oh, there is no big deal, right? People need the gasoline, and they need gasoline at the lower prices. So they just shift that curve, and in this case, there is no harm to the demanders from their point of view, but these greedy oil companies will not get as much profit as they could. So basically what happens in this way of thinking, prices don't coordinate decision. They merely redistribute wealth. So this is the so fixing prices actually, as we discussed, suspending that coordinating role of prices they play in the economy. But it's not the truth. In real life, and the economists' economic way of thinking share that view, in real life, the demand curve for any product is not the vertical line, because producers substitute between goods. If we see that price of the good is rising, what consumers will do? They will find these substitutes. So that means the demand curve is not vertical, but downward sloping. Supply curve is not horizontal. Supply curve is upward sloping. Why? Because if the producers are facing the high prices, they have a huge incentives to produce more. And we saw that in the Canadian wheat example. When the prices on the market was increased due to the market for wheat was increased due to the drought in Russia and Ukraine, the farmers were willing and able and really supplied more wheat on the market. So that's why in that framework, the change in prices played that crucial coordinating role in the view of the people who fix the prices on the market. Prices don't play that role. What they expect for price is just to play a redistributive role in the economy, which is not the case. So having looked deeply into the minds of people who are trying to fix the prices on a free market, we're going to talk about scarcity and competition. It's just one building block, theoretically, before we look at the consequences of the fixing prices on the marketplace. Scarcity and competition, very important relationship. So first of all, what is the scarcity? It's a fundamental concept in economics, and we discussed it in the first chapter. Basically, scarcity is a relationship between the availability, say, or supply, and desirability or demand. A good is scarce whenever people cannot obtain as much of it as they would like without being required to sacrifice something else of a value. So let's look at the Canada. In Canada, many people try to avoid snakes. I myself, right, I'm afraid of snakes. So although we have just probably a few venomous snakes in Canada, so very rare snakes. Snakes are not scarce good, right, in Canada. But in Thailand, when it's a country, you see, I've never been in Thailand, but I know that there are many snakes in Thailand. In Thailand, snakes used as the, say, raw material for food, right? So, people cook them, right? So in that environment in Thailand, snakes are scarce good because people are willing to obtain them and do something with them. So that's why scarcity is not related to the per se is that good is rare or not. It's a relationship between the availability and desirability. So no one blaze thermometer for low temperature because it reflects the weather condition, right? But people do, however, often blame high prices for the scarcity of certain goods and act as if scarcity could be eliminated by enforcing price controls. And we saw that in the middle of 70s, government of Canada established fixed prices for gasoline to eliminate the shortages of gasoline, they thought. Prices, like a thermometer, just reflect underlying conditions, conditions of demand and supply, interactions between the demand and supply. Next piece of the theory. We know from the chapter 1 that if good is scarce, it must be rationed. In other words, a criterion of some kind must be established for discriminating among claimants, people who want to obtain that good, to determine who will receive how much. The other side of the discrimination, in other words, allocation of this good between claimants, is a competition. Once Bissett School of Business at Mount Royal University announces its criteria for discrimination, applicants, say high school students, will compete to meet them. So competition is not confined to capitalist societies. It's very important to understand that competition results from scarcity, and as a result can be eliminated only with the elimination of scarcity. Again, if we go back to our example of the actions of the government of Canada, they were establishing fixing prices. They were trying to eliminate the scarcities for gasoline, but it was a futile attempt. Whenever there is a scarcity, there must be rationing. Rationing is allocation in accord with some criteria for discrimination. Of course, the criteria that was used do make a difference. If in our society, rations on the basis of willingness to pay money, members of that society will strive to make money. Say, often we, say instructors, and I myself, in that group, often we blame students that they strive to get a high grade. And I see that students, especially nowadays, that not concerned much about the quality of the knowledge they get, but the what grade they get for the subject. But it's not we don't have to blame students for that, because the high marks they get at the university, the higher GPA they will get, the better their chances to get a job. So criteria, so this is one of the criteria. GPA, it's can be viewed as a criteria to get a job. And if we put students in that environment, declaring these criteria, of course, they will be striving for higher grades. So now we are ready, we equipped with the knowledge to look at the what happened to the consumers and producers when the prices are fixed, say, by the government. So the question is, yeah, we are going again to our market for gasoline, and what will happen when the gasoline becomes more scarce, as was in the middle of 70s, but its money price is not allowed to rise. So the government fixed the price for the gasoline. So this is the picture of the market for gasoline, demand and supply. Government steps in and establishes the ceiling price, the government fixed price on this level. So at this government fixed price, we see that the amount of gasoline demanded by the consumers much bigger than the amount of gasoline that producers are willing to supply. That difference between quantity demanded and quantity supply is called the shortage. So what happens on that market at this price? So if government suppressed the rationing device of the monetary price, so if price is prevented from playing its rationing role, other rationing criteria must be used, right? Because the scarcity is not eliminated. So potential purchasers, consumers, will attempt to discover the new criteria, and they will compete against each other trying to satisfy these criteria. So what you would do is, say, you on a table to satisfy the demand for gasoline at that price. So what will happen on the gas station? You will see that there will be lineups of people. Say if the gas station opens at 6 a.m., so if you arrive at 5:30, there'll be lots of people who will be competing for that restricted amount of gasoline. So, but it's costly for you. So if you rely that too many people, you will be looking at another gas station, right? It's driving expenses, time. Then what will be another option, right? If it was in Ukraine, and if the owner was your friend, you just come to your friend and say, oh, can you open that gas station at 5 a.m. and I'll give you a ticket to the theater performance, kind of a bribe, and I could fill my tank. So people will find a different solution, right, to their problem, and will be competing against each other. But it will be costly. So as a result, competition will not be eliminated by that fixing price. And competition will just use another criteria, and it will rate the total cost, price, and non-monetary cost, these bribes and the time in the lineup. And the competition will continue to rise the cost of you obtaining the gasoline until the quantity demanded will be equal to the quantity supplied. So you see, basically, this rectangle stands for the non-money costs. And non-money cost plus money cost will result in that level of cost you will be paying for the liter of gasoline. And at that price, quantity demanded will be equal quantity supplied. So it's, in this case, you will see that legal ceiling price suppresses the prices to perform their rationing role. What would happen if you release the price? In that market, then there'll be no lineups, right? When the free market forces will establish this market clearing price, and everybody will be satisfied. You come into the gas station, the price was a little bit higher, but there will be no lineups. And it will be no chaos, right, that on the gas stations. So that's why that legal ceiling price suppresses the money competition, but not eliminating competition at all. So now we will be looking closely to the supplier's role in rationing of scarce good. So typically, we expect to see money price of a good rise when the good become more scarce. Here we see that in real life. But why? Why suppliers have incentives to increase the price? You see, prices don't change automatically, as sometimes the students get impression from the studying economics that prices change automatically. It's the people who change the prices, and the incentives and willingness to change, to increase or lower a price. They make the decision to change prices. And this happens because it's always in the interest of suppliers to raise money price rather than see some other components of the acquisition cost increase. So if you're asking a question, typically, what does the owner of a gas station gain when customers wait in line for 30 minutes? If any, say, businessman see the lineups, say if the owner of ice cream shop is observing that there are lineups for his ice cream, say for a couple of weeks, he has all incentives to increase the price. Increase in non-money cost usually entails increase in what the economist calls deadweight costs. There are costs to the buyer that are not simultaneously benefits to the seller. If you look at the diagram, these money costs, say if at the legal ceiling price, producers are willing to apply that amount of gasoline. And if consumers are buying that type of gasoline, so the cost they are paying to the producers become income to producers. But if that price is fixed, competition rated the so-called non-money cost. And these are deadweight costs because they are not the benefits or income to sellers. And when sellers have the ability to raise the price, they will transform actually these deadweight costs into a benefit for themselves. And of course, they are willing to do this. And when they have that simple tool in their possession, of course, they will be using it. So that's why changing in money prices, say, are usual responses to changes in relative scarcities. Because in this way, producers will transform deadweight cost into the income for themselves. And when prices are not permitted to signal change in relative scarcities, as this legal ceiling price, suppliers and demanders receive inappropriate signals. Because the price is a signal, is the information to the demanders and suppliers about scarcity of the good. So when owner of a gas station see lineups for the gasoline, it's the information to him about the change in the scarcity for the gasoline. And he will be, in this case, he will be increasing the price of the gasoline to reflect that change in scarcity. So in this situation, when government fixed the price, consumers and producers don't find a proper way to accommodate each other. So, and we saw that on the gas station in the Canada and the United States, all that chaos that created by when the government fixed the price. So now we do some quick summary overview of the whole chapter. We've been focusing on the interaction between the demanders and suppliers and the role of prices in that process. So, and we emphasize the role of the transaction cost to secure the coordination between buyers and sellers. As we discussed, that the modern economies, they created through the long process, the numerous institutions that reduce the transaction costs. And the system of money prices that changes readily in response to changing conditions of demand and supply is an essential mechanism for coordinating behavior in a highly specialized economy. And we saw what happened when the money prices were not allowed to perform that role. So another piece of, knowledge we got from the discussion is that the scarce good must be rationed in some fashion. And competition is an attempt to satisfy whatever discrimination criteria are being used to ration scarce goods. When competition is prevented from raising prices, it will raise other components of the cost of obtaining or acquisition. These are often deadweight costs, costs to demanders, that unlike money payments are not benefits to suppliers. And when the government imposes the fixed price, they probably didn't realize about these deadweight costs that consumers actually have to carry. And we discussed that suppliers usually have incentive to convert deadweight costs into benefits for themselves by raising money prices when a shortage appears.